We've sent rovers to Mars, begun mapping the ocean floor, and are now using AI to unlock ancient languages. So why are there still places here on Earth no one's allowed to explore? Some say it's to protect the past. Others think we're hiding something. Either way, I'm Mike with List 25, and I've found the most secretive, dangerous, and heavily guarded archaeological sites on Earth, starting with some ancient cave paintings we were destroying by simply breathing on them. But in 1940, 4 French teens did the exact opposite. Chasing after a friend's dog that had disappeared into a hole beneath an uprooted tree, they stumbled into an underground gallery filled with over 600 vivid wall paintings, created by humans more than 17,000 years ago. This was the Lascaux caves. Soon, crowds were lining up to see the prehistoric masterpieces and stories left behind by our distant ancestors. But there was one problem. We were destroying it. The carbon dioxide in human breath, along with heat and fungi from our sweaty presence, started damaging the ancient pigments. So, just 23 years after opening to the public, the caves were permanently sealed in 1963. To this day, the Lascaux caves are still off limits, strictly reserved for a handful of scientists. The rest of us were given a replica. A pretty good one, sure, but still a copy of the original Stone Age gallery. And speaking of underground mysteries, let's look at another one. No list of ancient tech would make sense without the Antikythera mechanism. So, it goes first. Pulled from a Greek shipwreck in 1901 and dating back to around 100 BCE, this bronze device is considered the oldest known analog computer on the planet. Inside its corroded shell, researchers uncovered more than 30 precision-cut gears built to predict eclipses, model planetary cycles, track the moon's phases, and even calculate the dates of the Olympic Games. From what we've gathered about it to date, it was hand-cranked, with a pin-and-slot gear system that accurately mirrored the moon's uneven orbit. Nothing else came close to this level of mechanical complexity for over 1,000 years. And somehow, modern scans keep revealing new details that leave engineers amazed. Today's artificial eyes come with permanent implants and custom-fitted acrylics. I mean, heck, I even covered one that comes with its own AI the other day, but they go way back. As in, way, way back. The oldest one we've ever found was over 4,800 years old. 4,800. It was discovered in Shahrazad, Iran, also known as the Burnt City, in 2006 inside a woman's grave, and was made of a mixture of tar and animal fat. The surface was covered in a thin sheet of gold and etched with fine lines to look like an iris. Tiny holes on the sides showed it had been strapped into place with cord. She turned out to be a woman who died in her mid-20s to early 30s, and for that era, she was unusually tall, close to 1.8 meters. Archaeologists picked up on signs of infection and irritation in her skull, which suggests that she wore it for a long time, and that it might have even ultimately led to her death. The Babylonian people used clay tablets to study the stars. They did this at their ancient megacity in Iraq around the 20th and 6th century BCE. We think they made their so-called star maps or tablets in approximately the 7th century. As I mentioned, the tablets were sculpted from clay, but the really important thing is what was on them. An old form of writing called cuneiform was used to record information about the stars and planets. The people of Babylon weren't the only ancient people who did this kind of thing, with the Egyptians, Indians, and Chinese all having the same interest and their own recording systems. However, the Babylonians are among the oldest civilizations to investigate the heavens. Well, Emperor Qin Shi Huang took that to the next level by posting an army of thousands of clay soldiers to stand watch at his gravesite. So in 2010 BCE, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor to unify China, was laid to rest in the largest tomb in Chinese history. But this wasn't just any royal grave. It was an underground kingdom, reportedly meant to mirror the ancient capital city, Xianyang. The tomb is surrounded by the famous Terracotta Warriors, and their horses, chariots, and weapons. It was discovered in 1974, and excavation quickly started. But then, the actual burial chamber is still untouched. Well, this is because scientists are terrified of destroying it. We've sent people to the moon, yet we still don't have the tech to explore this tomb without risking irreversible damage. For now, the Emperor rests undisturbed, and the rest of us strictly kept out. A blade that refused to rust for over 2,000 years and time basically forgot? It sounds like the stuff of legends, the kind of sword King Arthur should have pulled out of the stone. However, this one belonged to the king Goujian of Yue, who ruled in China around the 5th century BCE. When it was discovered in a waterlogged tomb in 1965, the bronze sword came out pretty much immaculate, with the cutting edge still sharp enough to draw blood. Metallurgists found it was made with about 5% tin for hardness, along with small amounts of arsenic and sulfur that helped form a protective patina. Even its scabbard showed remarkable foresight, since the lacquer seal kept out air and moisture. It defied time in every sense of the word. Before we had TikTok, Disney, even before we had paper, people were already trying to make pictures move. The same site that gave us the world's oldest fake eye also gave us a little clay goblet that's about 5,000 years old. At first glance, it looks just like a very old cup. It's got a goat with big horns painted around it 5 times in sequence. First standing, then leaping, then stretching higher, until finally it reaches the leaves of a tree. All very bland. Until you start spinning it. Then those images blur together, and it actually looks as if the goat is jumping. The goblet measures about 10 centimeters or 4 inches tall and can be found in the National Museum of Iran. Time was measured using water in ancient Greece. I'm talking about a clepsydra, which is Old Greek for water clock. They're also known by the name water thief. Instead of a clock, you would have a vessel full of water, with the water being slowly released as the hours went by. There are records of stone vessels in an upside-down cone shape, with markings on the sides so people could tell the time. The water clock was popular and lasted for centuries, not just in Greece, but in Egypt, where it's said the idea started. While water thieves are still used by some, they've largely died out along with the ancient Greeks. Mechanical clocks ticked their way into people's hearts during the late 1200s, consigning the clepsydra to historical oblivion. When you think of ancient Rome, you probably picture Julius Caesar, gladiators, and grand columns. But there's another site still carrying Rome's legacy, Leptis Magna. This ancient city, located on the Libyan coast, was part of Roman history. It was first established as a Punic settlement before 500 BCE. It flourished under Emperor Septimius Severus. But after centuries of wars and invasions, it was abandoned around 647 CE, buried under dust and sand. That is, until 1920, when Italian archaeologists uncovered it. When excavations started, lots of stunning structures were discovered. There was also a warrior battling a deer, 4 men wrestling a wild bull, and a gladiator catching a break after slaying his opponent. Leptis Magna is off-limits to tourists. Due to political instability and violence in Libya, access is restricted, with only select tours or research teams allowed in. So, unless you're packing a press badge and body armor, Leptis Magna will have to stay on your ancient bucket list. But sadly, it's not the only location folks are robbed of experiencing because of political instability. Here's another one. This 4,000-year-old piece of ivory can rival your tape measure. I kid you not. The discovery turned up in Lothal, an ancient port city in India built by the Harappans around 2400 BCE. We now know it's a scale, and while it might look like a simple strip of ivory, the markings on it are insane. They're spaced a mere 1.6 millimeters, or about 1/16 of an inch apart, cut so precisely you could imagine seeing it on a modern building site. Think about that for a second. They were laying out streets, trading goods, and building drainage systems with the kind of accuracy you'd expect from laser tools today. They were measuring everything down to the tiniest fraction, and they nailed it. If you thought dentistry was a Greek invention, well, I've got news for you. The oldest proof of dental work comes from Meghar, a Neolithic settlement in present-day Pakistan. There, archaeologists uncovered human teeth that had already been drilled sometime between 7,000 and 5,500 BCE. The holes were neat and circular, showing that someone used a flint-tip drill, probably powered by a bowstring. In some cases, the teeth even had concentric rings from the tool, like grooves cut into the enamel. We think that they likely packed the holes with bitumen, a sticky tar that worked as a filler, and may have numbed the pain a little. They have found 11 molars with drill holes in total, all from adult burials. How on earth do you hitch the sun to a post? Intihuatana is an ancient Inca word used in the Andes, translating as hitching post to the sun. The Quechua people used lumps of granite which they believed had the power to tether the sun and make sure that it didn't, float off anywhere. These Intihuatana stones were designed to throw shadows, which people would rely on to tell them when important events such as the solstice were happening. One iconic location where you can find these stones is Machu Picchu in Peru, which was inhabited between 420 and 1530. Experts aren't entirely sure when Machu Picchu was constructed, so the technology behind these sun harnessing stones is shrouded in mystery. Back in 321 BCE, just 2 years after Alexander the Great's death, his empire was basically in chaos. All his generals were scrambling for control. Seleucus somehow managed to win in 312 BCE and promptly founded the Seleucid Empire. This was when Hatra was born, an important city that flourished as a religious center under the Seleucid rule in the 3rd or 2nd century BCE. But, as always, wars eventually caught up with it. Legend has it that Al-Nadira, the king's daughter, betrayed her city, allowing Shapur to conquer it, kill the king, and marry her. When Hatra was later discovered by German archaeologists in 1907, it turned out to be one of the best preserved Parthian cities, complete with temples and statues. However, due to the ongoing conflicts in Iraq, Hatra is off limits to anyone but the bravest researchers. It's been looted severely, and in 2015, videos surfaced of ISIS destroying statues and structures. And so, currently, curious tourists are prevented from finding out what's left of what Seleucus had started. The Assyrians were already working with optics 2,700 years ago, and this chunk of rock crystal proves it. Dug up in 1850 at the palace of Nimrud in what is now Iraq, the Nimrud lens measures about 1.5 inches, or roughly 3.8 centimeters across, with one side ground flat and the other curved to give around 3 times magnification. Archaeologists think it might have helped scribes read cuneiform tablets or let craftsmen carve out fine details, although no one can say for sure. Some have even suggested it was part of a telescope, but that theory is shaky at best. What is clear is that someone shaped and polished this lens on purpose, which took a steady hand and a solid grasp of materials. When it comes to oracles, our minds usually jump straight to Greece. The thing is, Delphi's oracle wasn't active until about 1000 BCE. China had already been writing down its own divinations centuries earlier, and by 1200 BCE they left us one of the largest written archives. The so-called oracle bones were discovered in 1899 and were made of turtle shell and ox shoulder blades. The Shang dynasty diviners would carve questions into them. Things like, will the harvest be good? Or, will the king's army win? Then heat the bone until cracks appeared. The crack patterns were read as the answer, which was then carved right back onto the same bone. So far, more than 13,000 of these oracle bones have been found, with over 130,000 inscriptions, making them the oldest significant body of Chinese writing still in existence. The world's oldest coloring comes from ancient Egypt. Egyptian blue is believed to have been made around 2600 BCE. The vivid color represents rebirth, the stars, and the famous River Nile. The pigment can be seen on artifacts and other archaeological wonders from that civilization. While it's centuries old, it also shares something that our modern pigments have today. You see, Egyptian blue is the world's first color produced synthetically, as in using a non-natural process. It's incredible we can still see it because other ancient colors would have faded long ago. Egyptian blue is pretty tough stuff, so what was it made from? Ingredients included copper, lime, and sand. Yeah, sand. So it must have been quite gritty. Pyramids aren't only an Egyptian thing, you know. The Putupicha Empire had its own fair share of them. And okay, maybe they don't quite match the grand resting places of Egyptian pharaohs, but this ancient city still delivered. Ceremonial plazas, stone pyramids, and yakatas, those cool semicircular temple platforms. It even had what archaeologists think was an astronomical observatory. So yeah, not bad at all. The Ihuatzio site is basically a throwback to the Putupicha Empire. These guys were one of the few civilizations that managed to resist the mighty Aztecs. And Ihuatzio? That was one of their major strongholds. A lot of tourists still pour in to explore what's left of it. But then, well, sorry to disappoint, a big chunk of Ajaccio is still forbidden. While spots like the Plaza de Armas are open, the rest, off limits. Most of the site hasn't been excavated yet, and after a pyramid partially collapsed in 2024 from heavy rains, things got even tighter. For now, it's a waiting game. But there's also another forbidden pyramid site in Mexico. The Romans had a glass cup that could flip its color from green to glowing red. Called the Lycurgus cup, it can be dated to the 4th century CE, and is covered in scenes of King Lycurgus wrapped around in a delicate cage pattern, a design that pushed Roman glasswork well beyond everyday tableware. It was made with gold and silver particles so tiny they measure about 70 nanometers across. That mix, about 330 parts per million silver and 40 parts per million gold, scattered light to create those shifting colors, depending on how the cup was lit. It's absolutely amazing, because even if they didn't fully understand the science, the Roman glassmakers managed to pull off what we now call a nanotech effect. Over 1,300 years ago, someone in China sat down and mapped the entire night sky. That map, known as the Dunhuang Star Atlas, was discovered in the Mogao Caves and is the oldest complete star chart still in existence. The atlas shows over 1,000 stars carefully grouped into 257 constellations that line up with Chinese constellations and include notes on planetary movements and lunar phases. That means it worked both as a calendar and a guide for rituals, navigation, and imperial planning. What makes it amazing is its accuracy. Modern astronomers tested the atlas against today's sky maps and found the star positions a lot more accurate than they expected. Today, it's considered one of the most valuable astronomical artifacts in existence. Like us, the ancient Mayans enjoyed sporting events. Plus, they had courts to play them in. They lived in a huge area called Mesoamerica between 2000 BCE and 1600 CE, where they played a special game focusing on control of a rubber ball. The courts were constructed in shapes, specifically an I or a T. Evidence of this type of venue has been found in various cities of the ancient Maya. The Mayans took these games extremely seriously, and I don't mean that they were fanatical about their teams. I mean something deeper. You see, the ball games were tied to their religious beliefs and were seen as spiritual and symbolic. So back in 2007, it was time to update the list of the 7 wonders of the world. And guess who made the cut? Chichen Itza and its famous El Castillo pyramid. This castle, dedicated to the feathered serpent god Kukulkan, has fascinated thousands of folks through the years. But here's a fun fact. It has 365 steps, one for each day of the solar year. It's pretty fascinating, right? But if you were planning to climb the pyramid, well, you're out of luck. In 2006, a woman tragically fell to her death while climbing, and because of this, well, it's been banned ever since. No one's allowed to get too close anymore. While you can still visit the ruins and enjoy the view of El Castillo, the top of the pyramid is off limits. The climbing ban also shut off access to the throne room inside, so tourists now have to imagine how it looks from the ground. In Pompey's House of the Surgeon, archaeologists uncovered more than 40 metal instruments dating back to the 1st century CE, including scalpels with replaceable blades, bone saws, forceps, scissors, probes, catheters, and even cupping vessels for bloodletting. It's well known that Roman physicians were skilled enough to perform cataract removal, treat head injuries with skull drilling, and handle complicated births with cesarean sections. But did you know that some of their tools, like screw-operated vaginal speculomes, were designed so well they barely changed for nearly 2,000 years? Add in ancient hospitals and organized medical schools, and maybe it's time everyone realized Roman medicine was operating at a level far ahead of what people usually imagine. Found in Xi'an and carved back in 781, the Nestorian Stele is a limestone tablet that runs nearly 9 feet tall. What makes it stand out is the text, written in both Chinese and Syriac, that documents how Christianity had already spread deep into China during the Tang dynasty. The inscription tells how missionaries from Daqin, the name used for the Byzantine Empire, first arrived in 635. The Tang emperor welcomed them, gave permission to build monasteries, and even issued decrees recognizing their practices. The stele was buried after 845 during a wave of anti-foreign religious policies in Tang China, and remained underground until its rediscovery in 1625. It is the earliest physical evidence that Christianity was practiced in China over a millennium before the Jesuits appeared. The Byzantine hydraulis was the perfect thing to play during public gatherings, where it celebrated religious happenings and royal events. It dates back to the 3rd century BCE and was made by the inventor and craftsman Stasibius, who was Greek and lived in Egypt. His inventions outlived him in more ways than one, by which I mean we know a lot about what he created, but not a lot about the man himself. Forget the Pet Shop Boys and their Depeche Mode, this incredible keyboard was the height of spectacle and performance in ancient time. 9 times out of 10, the Eiffel Tower and its romantic vibes come to mind whenever we picture Paris. But there's something else you need to know. Right under the streets of Paris is a network of underground galleries and tunnels known as the Paris Catacombs. It was built in the late 18th century to house the remains of destroyed tombs during the expansion of the city. Now, the catacombs are of course a pretty fascinating sight, so millions of visitors show up every year. But sadly for them, only about 1% of the entire underground network is open to the public. Not every tourist is satisfied with this, and sometimes they go snooping around the insides of the catacombs using secret entrances like the sewers. But do not get any ideas. It's illegal, and you'll face a fine if you get caught. Not to mention, incredibly dangerous. People get lost down there. A giant marble calculator might sound impossible, but the Greeks had one on Salamis Island. Unearthed in 1846 and dating to around 300 BCE, the Salamis tablet is a massive slab measuring about 59 by 29 inches, or 149 by 75 centimeters. It was carved with rows of parallel grooves and lined with Greek numerals, giving merchants and students a way to work through addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division by moving pebbles along the channels. The layout even handled units, tens, and higher place values, mixing base 10 and base 60 math systems. In 1986, Sichuan workers were digging in Sanxi Dui when they found 2 massive pits stuffed with Bronze Age treasures. Their finds included enormous bronze heads, a life-size bronze figure that stood over 8 feet tall, a bronze tree sculpture, golden masks, and piles of ivory. The bronzes were completely different from those of the Shang dynasty in central China, and they pointed to a culture previously unknown, now believed to be the Shu Kingdom in southwest China. Archaeologists eventually cataloged over 1,000 artifacts from the pits, many of them deliberately broken and burned before burial. They were still pulling treasures out in 2021, including bronze pieces, silk, and jade. So much of our manufacturing relies on textiles, and we have the ancient world to thank for a key invention. The spinning wheel comes from India between the years 500 and 1000, and its significance cannot be overstated. It works by twisting fibers into yarn using a spinning mechanism simply driven by your hands and feet. From here, the material was bonded, resulting in textiles, which did everything from keeping you warm during a cold night to forming the basis for religious outfits. This development then received a boost in the 1700s when the Industrial Revolution supercharged the process, replacing human power with machines. It's unbelievable to think we're still following techniques that were dreamt up centuries ago. You know how they say you should learn from your mistakes? Well, France did just that. The Chauvet Cave is another underground ancient gallery with hundreds of prehistoric artworks decorating its walls for over 36,000 years. But while the cave is renowned, it is completely off limits to tourists. Why? Well, after what happened with Lascaux, the French learned from their mistakes and shut the doors of the Chauvet Cave to visitors so it wouldn't suffer the same fate. It might sound harsh, but in my opinion, it makes sense, and it's pretty necessary. So only official scientists are allowed to go in there and to work on the art pieces. You know those water organs you might spot at a theme park or some malls? The Greeks were already showing off their version over 2,000 years ago. Archaeologists discovered the hydraulis in 1992 at Dion in northern Greece. It dates back to the 1st century BCE and is the oldest known keyboard instrument in history. It used water to steady the air pressure flowing through bronze pipes, creating music loud enough for packed arenas. Excavations turned up parts of the pipes, bits of the sliders, and fragments of the air chest, enough to figure out how it once worked, even though it was no longer playable. Researchers were able to build a working replica in 1999 and showed it could blast out a powerful, clear sound, almost like a small pipe organ, and play simple melodies without cutting out. It was a solid mix of engineering and art. When most of the world was still figuring out farming, the Indus Valley people were already building a dockyard big enough to berth ocean-going ships. Measuring 218 by 37 meters, it was built of kiln-baked bricks and included sluice gates, spillways, and a lock system to regulate tidal flows. The basin is connected to an ancient river that once flowed into the Gulf of Cambak, giving ships direct access to maritime trade routes. From here, the Harappans could move beads, cotton, ivory, and semi-precious stones out toward the Persian Gulf and Mesopotamia. The engineering was clever too. The dock was designed to rise and fall with the tides, so it kept the vessels safe even when water levels moved. Archaeologists also uncovered warehouse foundations next to the dock, where goods like beads, gems, and cotton textiles were stockpiled before being shipped out. Before speedometers and fancy technology in cars, ancient Greeks relied on the odometer. It used a combination of wheel power, gears, and pebbles to show how far you'd come since setting off on your journey. Your vehicle would be a wagon or a cart pulled by a horse. The odometer connected your wheels to your gears, dropping pebbles as you turned and racking up those miles. This ancient technology has been dated back to the 3rd century BCE, however, we still don't know who invented it. One possible candidate was Archimedes, the mathematician and physicist. He was certainly a prolific inventor at the time, who created weapons of war and built on existing concepts such as the pulley system. North Korea as a country is already very strict with letting visitors in, let alone having someone wander around a site like the complex of Goguryeo tombs. Now, the complex of Goguryeo tombs goes as far back as the, fittingly, Goguryeo Kingdom, which ruled parts of China and Korea between the 3rd century BCE and 7th century CE. This massive burial site has over 10,000 tombs, with really impressive wall paintings that show off royal life. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, alright, but getting a peek is almost impossible. Given how North Korea isn't really high on a spot for tourism, this ancient treasure remains pretty much off limits. There's a giant 6-ton iron pillar in Delhi, India that just refuses to corrode, no matter what the weather throws at it. Standing about 7 meters or 23 feet tall, this column was built during the Gupta Empire in the 4th century CE. Its blacksmiths forged it with 99.7% pure iron and a high phosphorus content, which formed a stable layer of iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate on the surface. That coating has protected it through centuries of monsoons, heat, and pollution. Experts think it was forge welded into a single piece, meaning the pillar was built by heating separate iron chunks and hammering them together until they fused into one solid column. That took precise temperatures, massive furnaces, and serious craftsmanship to pull off, especially for something this big. In 132, a Han Dynasty scholar named Zhang Heng built what would become the world's first seismoscope. It looked like a massive wine vessel decorated with dragons and toads. Each dragon held a bronze ball in its mouth, and inside, a hidden pendulum waited for the ground to shake. When seismic waves arrived, the pendulum shifted just enough to trigger one dragon, releasing its ball into the open mouth of a toad. That sound told observers not only that an earthquake had struck, but in which direction. According to official records, the machine once sensed a quake hundreds of kilometers away, long before the news reached the court. Engineers have tried to rebuild it, but none of the copies have managed to perform as well as the version described almost 2,000 years ago. During the Han Dynasty around the 2nd century BCE, it utilized the magnetic properties of lodestone, a mineral. Here's a surprising fact. The early compasses weren't used for navigation. Originally, they were more of a spiritual thing, helping builders put up temples in the right place. You may know this way of doing things by the name feng shui, or wind water, where the elements play a big role in everyday life. Also, the compass wasn't a round thing made of metal and glass, but an actual lodestone carving, said to be shaped like a spoon. This old-school piece of technology is still used, even though it's been replaced by the likes of GPS. This is one of the longest caves in Canada, and ironically, not a castle or a guard in sight. Castle Guard Cave is just good old limestone. but it's anything but ordinary. Hidden deep beneath the icy spine of the Rocky Mountains, Castleguard Cave stretches over 20 kilometers under Alberta's Banff National Park. Now, most northern caves aren't exactly known for flashy formations, but Castleguard said, "Hold my stalactite." Some parts shine with flowstone, rare cubic pearls, and soda straws so perfect they look almost man-made. It's also the only cave in North America under a glacier, and its back passages are sealed off by thick plugs of ice, a literal frozen dead end. But this isn't your average spelunking destination. Access is strictly limited to scientific researchers, and for good reason. The environment is ridiculously fragile and easy to wreck with even the smallest misstep. So curious folks have to stick to documentary episodes and science blogs. Moving on, we go from ice to a little portal to hell. Someone in Bronze Age Cree more or less cracked how to copy-paste messages. The Phaistos Disc, found in 1908, shows 241 symbols stamped into a clay circle, instead of being carved one by one. That means they had pre-made stamps to press their messages into clay, repeating signs or letters with picture-perfect consistency. We still don't know exactly what those symbols meant. It could have been a hymn, a ritual chant, or some kind of puzzle, but the method behind them is what steals the spotlight. Instead of scratching out marks one at a time, they used a reusable stamping system, letting them mass-produce a text faster and cleaner. This was a giant leap for getting information out, way beyond anything their neighbors could pull off. When Russian explorers made it to Mongolia's Orkhon Valley in the 1890s, they ran into giant stone monuments carved all over with strange runic-looking symbols. These turned out to be the Orkhon inscriptions, created in 732 for Turkic rulers like Bilge Khan and his brother Kultigin. They brag about victories, warn against division, and hammer home the pride of the steppe tribes standing up to Chinese power. The find was incredible, since most historians believe that the nomadic cultures had left nothing in writing. To make it even better, these stelae carried Chinese translations along the old Turkic script, which is why scholars started calling them the Rosetta Stone of the Turkic script. The biggest of these slabs rise more than 10 feet high and is packed with over 2,800 carved characters running in vertical columns. The stelae were all placed along the Orkhon River, which used to be the political heartland of the Göktürkler. Glass began to take shape in ancient Rome. Literally. In the 1st century BCE, glassworkers took things to a new level by bringing in the blowpipe. Instead of core forming, where molten glass was placed around a solid core of sand and clay, people could now use their lungs to force the glass into different shapes. Glass blowing has its roots in the eastern Mediterranean, where temperatures were already quite high. The invention made the place a whole lot hotter. The technology was vital in making glass material for everyone, and not just the privileged few. Drinking glasses and vessels became fixtures in people's households for the first time, being produced economically and at a mass scale. No one really expects that when you build statues or monuments for ancient gods, they'd take it a little too seriously. Well, Pluto sure did, and his gate to hell in Turkey is kind of proof of that. It was built in the 2nd century BCE in the city of Hierapolis and dedicated to the Roman god of the underworld. The site was discovered in 2013, and it lives up to its name. The cave beneath releases toxic gases that are so deadly that birds that fly too close literally drop dead, dragged to the underworld. So the Turkish government banned visitors from getting too close because of the danger. So while the site is fascinating from a distance, you might want to keep said distance, unless you're up for a literal meet and greet with Pluto. And not the dog from Disney. I've done those before. What a great pup. Caligula built floating palaces that would put modern yachts to shame. When archaeologists found 2 of his massive ships in Lake Nemi in the 30s, they discovered technology so advanced that it barely made sense for the 1st century CE. The barges had heated baths with pipes for hot and cold water, plus pumps to keep the water moving, like a spa on a boat. They even had hand-operated bilge pumps to clear water from the hull, using a crank system nobody else figured out until medieval times. They also came with giant rotating platforms, so statues or heavy decorations could spin around smoothly. These platforms were set on actual bronze ball bearings, the same kind of design people usually credit to Leonardo da Vinci, except the Romans pulled it off more than 1,000 years earlier. The concept of zero wasn't born overnight, but the first time it shows up as a written number comes from a set of birch bark manuscripts found in Bakhshali, Pakistan. Discovered in 1881, the collection includes around 70 sheets written in Sanskrit, filled with arithmetic exercises, all showing the presence of a small dot, the earliest known symbol for zero, used as a placeholder in calculations. As these things go, though, experts could not decide on the age of the manuscript. Then, finally, in 2017, radiocarbon testing revealed that some of the pages dated as far back as the 3rd or 4th century, while others were written several centuries later. That places the Bakhshali manuscript hundreds of years ahead of other recorded zeros, like those in 9th century temple inscriptions from India. Elastic comes from the ancient Mesoamericans. It's not a stretch to say the world's earliest version of latex rubber was made around 1600 BCE. A blend of proteins, resin, gum, and other stuff which came out of trees, the substance was mixed with vine juice and used to make balls. As we've seen, these were great for sports. However, they also had a deeper meaning. Tree latex was comparable to both blood and semen, according to these ancient cultures. Over time, that association disappeared, with Charles Goodyear's work on vulcanization in the 19th century bringing us the rubbery product we now know in the 21st century. In 1957, archaeologists stumbled upon something wild in the middle of nowhere. A 65-meter brick minaret just chilling in a remote Afghan valley. Now, this wasn't some half-finished project either. I'm talking full-on decorative glory, complete with Kufic calligraphy and geometric designs that still leave jaws dropping centuries later. The Minaret of Jam was built in the 1100s during the Ghurid Empire and is believed to be all that's left of the ancient city of Firozkoh. You can think of it as Afghan's answer to a medieval skyscraper, but prettier. So why haven't you seen travel influencers posing in front of it? Well, this is another one of those look but don't touch sites. The location is insanely remote, tucked away in rugged mountain terrain. But that's just the beginning. Years of seasonal flooding have also eaten away at the base, leaving the minaret dangerously close to collapse. On top of that, political instability in the region has turned this ancient marvel into a complete no-go zone. But since I've mentioned floodwaters, let's move on to the sea. Bronze Age Europeans weren't just growing crops, they were charting the stars. The Nebra sky disk, dug up in 1999 near Nebra, Germany, is a 3,600-year-old bronze circle covered in gold symbols that laid out the night sky. You can see a crescent moon, a sun, or full moon, a tight cluster of 7 stars that look like the Pleiades, and arcs that line up with the sunrise and sunset on the summer and winter solstices. That means they were tracking exactly where the sun would rise and set across the seasons, a skill that helped them plan harvests and keep their calendar in sync. Even though it was found by looters and damaged along the way, experts agree this disk is the oldest realistic star map ever found. The Bantiang UNESCO site in northeast Thailand, uncovered in 1966, is a massive mound that was created by generations of habitation stretching back to 1500 BCE. The excavations here have revealed graves filled with bronze tools, ornaments, and ceramic vessels, as well as habitation layers showing evidence of smelting. Yes, smelting. Radiocarbon and thermoluminescence testing placed the earliest metalworking at Bantiang in the 2nd millennium BCE, with iron production beginning by about 1000 BCE. Before this discovery, everyone thought that metallurgy spread into the region much later, from China or India. Instead, Bantiang showed us that the local communities in the area were mastering metalwork on their own. The finds not only included the finished tools, but also crucibles, slag, and other casting evidence, which gave us a clear picture of their entire process. The Royal Road linked the Persian Empire, and was good for both trade and the monarchy. Built in the 5th century BCE and running 2,699 kilometers, it facilitated business and was an important route for delivering messages on behalf of the king. The epic road joined Persia's capital Susa with the city of Sardis to the west in Anatolia. It cut travel times from months to weeks. The Persian Royal Road was highly influential, featuring, as it did, a network of post office structures along the route. So we have the Persians to thank for the postal service also. People used the Royal Road for approximately 2,000 years, which isn't bad, considering it was just a track in the soil and not made of harder material. Ever wonder what you find while digging around London? Maybe a few coins, an old bottle, or, surprise, 4 medieval ships? Well, in the 60s, that's exactly what happened. Some workers digging near Blackfriars stumbled upon 4 medieval ships well hidden beneath the Thames. These were a bunch of long-lost vessels dating back to the 14th century. Now this is where it gets interesting. The Blackfriars shipwrecks, as they're called, aren't your average shipwrecks. They reveal a snapshot of London's maritime history, with everything from a 2nd century seagoing ship to vessels packed with red bricks from the 1666 Great Fire rebuild. Now you might be wondering, can I hop on a boat and cruise by to see this sunken ship? Well, sorry to puncture your boat, but they're off limits. To keep them safe from overzealous tourists, the exact location is kept tightly under wraps, and visitations are limited, or almost forbidden. And speaking of wreckage sites that are forbidden, here's another voyage from the past. Ancient China had mirror illusions that could give people a shock of their lives. These bronze mirrors from the Han Dynasty look completely ordinary from the front, polished up like any other shiny surface. But if you bounce sunlight off them onto a wall, a hidden image suddenly appeared, matching the design on the back of the mirror. Such was the prowess of the craftspeople in the 2nd century CE that they shaped the mirror so precisely, with tiny curves and dips, that the reflected light bent just right to project the pattern. Some people used them as conversation pieces, while others thought they had spiritual power. Either way, it's confirmation that they had an instinct for working with reflections that modern scientists took ages to figure out. In 1956, archaeologists opened a tomb in Hubei province in China and pulled out a sword that looked like it had just left the forge. Despite being buried for more than 2,000 years, the blade was spotless, with no traces of rust. One archaeologist even nicked his finger testing the edge, proving that it was still razor sharp. Inscriptions on the hilt identified it as the sword of King Goujian of Yue, a monarch from the 5th century BCE. Metallurgical analysis later revealed why the sword survived. The bronze alloy contained deliberate amounts of tin and other elements that made it resistant to corrosion. It was also treated with rust-proofing chemicals, and the scabbard turned out to be almost 100% airtight, sealing the blade away from moisture. The result was a sword in pristine condition, preserved perfectly across 2 millennia. When we think of Genghis Khan, the warlord, we think of bloody battlefields and endless conquests. The truth is, Genghis was more organized than you'd think, a fact which is demonstrated by the Mongol pony postal system from the 13th century. This was high-speed delivery Genghis Khan style, with messengers covering thousands of kilometers in a relatively short period of time. They stopped to switch steeds and saddles, and that was about it. The name Mongol pony postal system makes this thing sound like a children's playset, whereas actually it was used by couriers to transport everything a healthy dictatorship needs. If the thought of ponies sounds underwhelming to you, then remember, these were ancient Mongolian ponies, without a braid or sparkles in sight. And FYI, Genghis Khan, that's how he'd say his name. He wasn't American, so it would not be called Genghis Khan, just in case you're wondering why I pronounced it that way. That's how the Mongolians pronounce it. In 1629, the Batavia, a Dutch East India Company ship, wrecked off the Abrolhos Island in Western Australia. Bad day at sea? Sure. But what followed was straight up horror movie material. Around 100 passengers died instantly. The survivors scrambled to Beacon Island, but that was worse. There was no food, no water. Commander Pelsair took a lifeboat to get help, but his second in command, Geronimus Cornelis, a power-hungry lunatic, saw an opportunity. While Pelsair was away, Cornelis led a bloody mutiny, eliminating anyone who might oppose him. Over 100 people were murdered. It wasn't until months later that help finally returned. And let's just say, it wasn't a happy reunion. Cornelis and his goons were tried and hanged on the spot. Fast forward to 1963, when archaeologists located the wreck and started piecing together its gory past by studying the human remains and artifacts recovered from Beacon Island. Today, the wreck is a protected archaeological site. You can't dive there. But if it's any consolation, parts of the Batavia's hull and relics are on display at the Western Australia Museum. Close enough, right? But this isn't the only horror story found in the water. There's another that's just as haunting. If you watch this channel regularly, you'll know I've talked about King Tut's dagger before. But trust me, it's way more incredible than it looks. Found in his tomb, the blade looked like normal iron at first, but Tutankhamun lived during the Bronze Age, when true iron was unbelievably rare. In 2016, scientists performed X-ray fluorescent tests and cracked the secret. The dagger was made from meteorite metal. That iron had about 11% nickel and 0.5% cobalt, a chemical fingerprint of space rocks. The ancient Egyptians called it iron from the sky and treated it as something sacred. What blows my mind is that Bronze Age metalworkers figured out how to shape this super hard iron-nickel alloy with nothing but bronze tools, hammers, and fire. They managed to create a flawless blade that never rusted, pairing it with a gold hilt and a crystal pommel to fit a pharaoh. So, while the rest of the world was still figuring out which plants wouldn't kill them, Egyptian metalworkers were already forging a meteorite into a pharaoh's dagger. When archaeologists opened the tomb of Prince Liu Qiang and Princess Da Wan in 1968, they found two of the most remarkable burial garments in history. Both their bodies were wrapped in jade burial suits. Each suit used more than 2,000 tiny jade plaques cut to fit the contours of the body and was stitched together with gold wire. Tailored in 12 sections, the armor-like suits were meant to keep the souls of the deceased intact, a belief rooted in Han ideas of the afterlife. The tombs themselves, hidden in Lingshan outside Manchang, had been sealed for 2 millennia. They were also filled with painted ceramics, bronze vessels, luxury objects, and chariots buried with their horses. Unlike most royal tombs, these chambers had never been looted, so the prince and princess were discovered exactly as they were left in the 2nd century BCE. Would you walk across a deep gorge on a bridge made from grass and plants? The Incan Empire, which lasted from 1438 to 1533, created bridges from a type of grass called ichu, among other things. These bridges must have been strong because they reached a length of up to 30 meters. The ends of the bridge were attached to the stone with leather ties, and you could send all kinds of people and things along them. Apparently, they could take the weight of a caravan, so it sounds like you were on sure footing when using an ancient Incan bridge. This image is like something from an Indiana Jones movie, though he tended to walk across a lot of road bridges. It wouldn't be until the mid-18th century that the road bridge was invented, far away from the Incas in the Atlantic Ocean. Deep in the Belizean jungle is the Aktun Tunchil Mukna, a cave that feels like walking straight into a ghost story. For the ancient Maya people, it was a gateway to the underworld. Now, this wasn't some dark, echoey hole in the ground. It was a sacred site used for rituals, sacrifices, and offerings to the gods. And it shows. Scattered across the cave floor are ancient artifacts, pottery, tools, and the skeletal remains of those offered up, including the famous Crystal Maiden, whose bones now shimmer eerily thanks to centuries of mineral buildup. But here's the plot twist. Thanks to a few careless tourists, like one who dropped a camera on a 1,000-year-old skull, authorities had to step in. Large sections of the cave are now completely off limits, and general tourism is tightly restricted. So unless you're an archaeologist with special access, well, you'll be staying on the outside, squinting at the shadows through museum exhibits and YouTube documentaries. But there's another spooky location that people are kept away from because it's haunted. If you've watched a soccer match lately, you can thank the Olmec for getting that ball rolling. And I mean that literally. Around 1600 BCE, in what is now Mexico, they were already making rubber balls for their ceremonial ball games. And they did it with a recipe that puts even 19th century chemists to shame. They took sticky latex from local rubber trees and blended it with the juice of morning glory vines, which acted like a natural cross-linker to toughen and bounce up the rubber. By tweaking the amounts, they could make rubber softer, harder, or super springy. So when the Spanish explorers arrived, they were floored by how durable and flexible these balls were, with nothing remotely similar back home. Much more recently, though, some of the best and brightest at MIT actually studied the Olmec's rubber-making tricks and found their recipe still holds up, reproducing rubber strong enough for sandals, adhesives, and yes, sports balls. If you made it this far, I know you're just itching for me to mention this one. In 1974, farmers digging a well near Xi'an, China, pulled up bits of clay that turned out to be part of a life-size soldier. That broken statue was the first glimpse of Qin Shi Huang's underground army, now called the Terracotta Warriors. Archaeologists have since uncovered around 7,000 figures, each carved with unique features, lined up in battle formation. The soldiers aren't alone. Horses, bronze chariots, acrobats, musicians, and even waterfowl crafted from bronze have been found across the complex. The site itself is huge, about 22 square miles with over 600 pits. 3 of the largest are open inside the Emperor Qin Shi Huang Mausoleum Site Museum. The emperor's actual tomb mound, said to contain rivers of mercury, has never been opened. So far, just 2,000 warriors have been fully excavated, but even that number makes this one of the greatest archaeological finds of the 20th century. The modern dentist is scary enough. So, what were dentists like in ancient Maya culture? Well, they had a sophisticated approach with anesthetics, drills, and fillings that helped them maintain people's teeth with minimum discomfort. The tools weren't made of metal, with their drills carved from stone. Despite this sounding harsh, it appears the stone drills did a pretty good job of making holes in problem teeth. These Mesoamerican cultures also had a spiritual side, and this extended to the dentist chair and the temple. Inlays made from precious materials such as jade were placed inside someone's mouth as a status symbol. I guess you could compare it to the people who have gold teeth today. These procedures weren't cheap, but hey, that's a dentist for you, right? Most sites get locked down for safety, wear and tear, or political drama. But Bangara Fort in India? That's off limits because people swear it's haunted. This 16th century fortress was built by Raja Madhau Singh I, the younger brother of the King of Amber, in the 1570s. But the wild part about this palace is the superstitious backstory behind it. Legend says that a local princess, Ratnavati, was the target of a sorcerer's dark magic. To escape his curse, she supposedly caused his death, but not before he cursed the fort, leading to its eventual ruin. Even now, people hang on to the legend, believing that strange things happen once the sun goes down. Some tourists strongly believe they heard footsteps, whispers, and screams coming from the fort's abandoned buildings. So the government banned visits after sunset. But moving from scary sights, let's take a look at nature's wonder we sadly don't have access to. The Byzantines took a bronze disc and made it smart enough to handle an entire empire's calendar. Around the 6th century CE, someone built this clever little sundial that was so much more than just a shadow reader. Inside it were tiny bronze gears, carefully set up so you could adjust it for 16 different latitudes, from Constantinople down to Alexandria. That meant, no matter where you traveled, you could check the date, follow the sun, and maybe even track the moon's phases, all with one pocket-sized tool. Historians think it's the second oldest geared device ever found, right behind the famous Antikythera mechanism, and it proves that advanced clockwork didn't disappear in the so-called Dark Ages. Katsuren Castle in Okinawa is a 12th century fortress, but in 2016, it coughed up something far older: Roman coins dating back to the 4th century. Archaeologists trace the coins back to some of the late Roman emperors, including Constantine the Great and Valentinian I, so they were minted over 1,500 years before Katsuren Castle was even built. Now, before these coins turned up, there wasn't a shred of evidence linking Rome and Japan, so the find left archaeologists scratching their heads. The only conclusion they could come to was that the coins must have traveled east through traders long after they were minted, ending up in Okinawa centuries later. Are they right? Who knows? Katsuren Castle was known for its overseas links, and the coins may have been treasured keepsakes or collected curiosities by the time they arrived. The ancient Sumerians invented plows. Back in 4000 to 3000 BCE, a plow-like piece of technology made of wood was being used in the fields around ancient Sumer, South Mesopotamia. Though they probably didn't realize it at the time, the simple act of opening up the soil would become one of the major building blocks of modern farming. The Sumerian plow even evolved so it could drop seeds into the gaps made by cutting blades. Did the Sumerians get any credit for their amazing invention? Kind of. It took a while, because Charles Newbold and David Peacock developed the modern plow in the late 18th century in New Jersey. That was the official origin story for a while, and it's kind of accurate, but it doesn't really give us the full picture. In America's history, the popular belief is that humans arrived around 13,000 years ago. That was until Cactus Hill came along and threw that theory out the window. Located on a sand dune above the Nottoway River, the site is named after the prickly pear cacti dotting the landscape. Discovered in the 80s, excavations revealed multiple cultural layers, including Clovis and pre-Clovis occupations. Artifacts found are dated between 15 and 16,000 years old. It's almost as old as the Ice Age. This challenged the Clovis first theory, suggesting humans arrived much earlier than believed. However, as important as this site is, you can't go snooping around for an excursion. It is strictly off limits to the public. Only authorized researchers are allowed in. Even though so many of the Maya's books were destroyed, a few, like the Dresden Codex, survived. It's packed with math, so exact that you can predict solar eclipses and track Venus's cycles across the skies with the kind of calculations you'd expect from observatories. The ancient bark paper pages combined advanced astronomy with practical timing and allowed priests to plan everything from rituals to planting seasons. Their planetary tables rivaled anything found in the Old World and showed they understood time as a repeating pattern. But they went further. These codices didn't just list star positions. They also added myth, science, and ceremony into a sort of guidebook for running their society. That meant the Maya could align their calendar with the stars in such a way that they knew exactly when to plant, when to sacrifice, and when to celebrate. The Pizarric carpet doesn't look like something that should have survived for 2,400 years, but it was perfectly preserved inside a Scythian burial mound until its discovery in 1949. Dating to the 5th to 3rd century BCE, it's the oldest surviving pile carpet in the world. You'll actually find that in the Guinness World Records if you feel like Googling it. The piece is about 6 by 6.5 feet long, woven from dyed wool, and is more than 1.1 million knots in total. Its decorations are so detailed and intricate, in deep reds and golds, that experts believe it must have originated in Persia, where advanced carpet weaving was already known. What saved it was actually pure chance. Ancient looters broke into the tomb, which allowed water to seep in. It later froze solid and turned the grave into a natural freezer. Egyptians didn't mess around when it came to measuring the Nile River. No tape measures for them. They relied on structures made of stone, which were marked to show where the water levels were at any given time. This was handy for any flooding situations, and the name experts give these devices is, well, highly appropriate. The so-called Nilometers are one of the rarest things you can find in archaeology, and the earliest example comes from 3000 BCE. What's especially interesting about Nilometers is that they aren't just one thing. Some are columns, others are stone steps, and some are wells in the ground. This all points to a complex system, indicating the ancient world certainly wasn't a primitive one. It's believed the Nilometer measured the volume of the Nile for approximately 1,000 years. A question that's puzzled a lot of people has been Stonehenge. Where are they from, and how in the world did these massive stones get there? But if you were hoping to walk up and touch them to satisfy your curiosity, well, think again. The gigantic stones are found in the Salisbury Plain, arranged in a pretty stunning circular formation, and have stood the test of time for over 4,000 years. People flocked to this site in the thousands, and the structure started suffering because of it. So in 1977, visitors were no longer allowed to go wandering around it. Ropes were also placed around the perimeter to stop anyone from getting too close. So now, you can only admire this ancient wonder from a distance. No touching allowed. If you lost a tooth in the 7th century BCE, Etruscan craftsmen could give you a replacement that was half jewelry, half medicine. These ancient dental pioneers in northern Italy came up with bridges made from human or animal teeth held together with gold bands. They carefully anchored the replacement tooth to the surrounding teeth, filling in gaps to keep a person's smile intact. Now granted, it didn't do much for biting into hard bread, and the hygiene left a lot to be desired, but the technique showed remarkable finesse. The gold they used was soft enough to bend and shape while staying strong enough to hold the bridge steady. And even though infections and irritation were common, the idea of replacing a missing tooth with a functional stand-in was a big step forward in oral care. In the 30s, French archaeologists opened 2 sealed rooms while digging in Bagram, Afghanistan, and found a stash, and I mean stash, of luxury goods dating back to the 1st and 2nd century CE. Inside were Roman glass cups and bowls, Egyptian and Syrian platters, carved Indian ivory statuettes, Chinese lacquer boxes, and bronze ornaments from Central Asia. The mix was incredible. Dozens of luxury items from across 3 continents, all resting together in one city. Most scholars believe it was a royal cache, either tribute or goods meant for trade, stored away and never recovered. Greek fire, used at sea and fired from ships, was a toxic liquid that could deliver a nasty burn. This wasn't a substance you could easily extinguish either, with Greek fire managing to flame on even on the surface of the water. First used by the Byzantine civilization in the 7th century BCE, it must have been a terrifying and disfiguring thing to face. The Byzantine navy used to propel the Greek fire from tubes, or worse still, throw chemical-packed grenades to explode on deck, showering their enemies in white-hot death. It was put together using a classified recipe, so experts today need to make educated guesses on what went into the hellish mixture. Greek fire might have contained petroleum, quicklime, sulfur, and other ingredients that did unsuspecting seafarers serious damage. If you've ever been fascinated by zebra stripes or the lines on your palm, wait till you see Peru's Nazca lines. It's almost like Earth showing off its own personal tattoo. From the ground, the lines don't look like much, but if you get a little altitude, say from a plane, your jaw will drop. That's exactly how they were first noticed. A pilot flying over the region spotted massive shapes carved into the desert floor. As it turns out, they were etched over 2,000 years ago by the pre-Inca Nazca people, who carefully scraped away red pebbles to reveal the lighter soil beneath. The result? Hundreds of giant geoglyphs, from clean geometric lines to massive animals, plants, and mythical beings. Naturally, conspiracy theories popped up, some saying it was likely alien landing strips. But then, as beautiful as the Nazca lines are, visitors are strictly banned from walking near them. The reason is rather simple. The soil is so fragile that even a few footprints could wreck the designs, so the best view is always from above, and well, that's kind of a win-win for everybody. That brings me to another view that's up above. The Romans had engineering down to an art, but they also left us a 12-sided head scratcher nobody has explained yet. Scattered all across their empire, over 100 of these bronze or iron dodecahedrons have been found, each one perfectly shaped with 12 pentagonal faces, round holes of different sizes, and tiny knobs on every corner. They do fit comfortably in the palm of your hand, but there's no written record to tell us what they did. What is clear, however, is that Roman metalworkers had the skill to cast these complex, symmetrical shapes down to the smallest details. Some show no signs of wear, making their purpose even more confusing. Were they ceremonial? Scientific? Just fancy toys? We'll probably never know. The Gua Yandong cave tools are famous not just because they're old, but because of how they were made. Instead of simply banging rocks together, whoever lived in this cave around 130,000 years ago used what's called the levallois technique. That means they shaped a stone core carefully, like prepping a mold, and then struck off flakes that were already pre-sized and ready for cutting or scraping. This method was considered a hallmark of Middle Paleolithic Africa and Europe, but the finds in Goujian, China proved it was happening in East Asia too. Radiometric tests dated the tools to somewhere between 80 and 170,000 years ago, making them the earliest known examples of this kind in the region. They could have been made by the Denisovans or Homo sapiens, but be that as it may, the discovery shows that advanced tool technology wasn't confined to one corner of the world. The ancient Minoans are responsible for the earliest known examples of a flush toilet. We know this because we found them at the archaeological site of the Palace of Knossos in Greece, where toilets made of stone helped the civilization take care of business. It's believed the toilet network was constructed sometime between 1900 and 1700 BCE, with the cisterns connected using terracotta pipes. Like us, they used gravity and water sources, including rainwater, to get rid of the waste, right up until around 1100 BCE, when the society died out. In some ways, the Minoan legacy is toilets. Strange as that may sound, with plumbing of a similar kind picked up hundreds of years following their demise. The The Minoans were doing their thing a century before the Romans developed the same idea, meaning they were well ahead of their time. Normally when it comes to burials, you hear 6 feet deep. But the ancient Chachapoya people of Peru thought, how about we do it differently? For them, the final resting place of warriors wasn't underground, it was the cliffside. And so, deep in the Andes lies the Los Pinchudos archaeological site, a cluster of wooden sarcophagi perched on a sheer rock face. These clay and stone tombs come with wooden roofs and bold paintwork in red, yellow, black, and white. And the name? It comes from some rather distinctive carvings of phalluses decorating the site. Somehow it meant something important back then. Now, before you lace up your hiking boots for a peek, don't. Any form of tourism is completely banned. Years of harsh weather and curious visitors have already taken a toll on the fragile structures. So, to protect what's left, the Peruvian government has shut down access to the area. Your only chance to admire these cliffside tombs, and their eyebrow-raising carvings, is through museum displays or the occasional documentary zoom-in. Here's another archaeological site with an interesting problem. The medieval world had its Big Ben moments, or more accurately, the Great Clock of Westminster, but it happened in China centuries before Europe even thought about gears. In 1094 CE, the inventor Su Song built a 12-meter clock tower in Kaifeng that used a water-driven escapement, the first one ever recorded, to release controlled bursts of power, keeping its gears turning in perfect rhythm. That let it rotate a giant star map, strike bells and drums to announce the time, and even track the position of planets. It worked like a planetarium and a clock rolled into one, showing hours, quarter hours, and celestial movements automatically. Su Song powered the whole system with an endless chain drive, a bit like a modern bike chain, which kept everything running smoothly. European engineers wouldn't catch up with escapement clockwork for another 300 years. The original tower was torn down in 1127, but its plans survived, letting modern engineers build scale models to test if it could actually run. And as it turns out, it worked just as Su Song designed it. Have you ever heard of Cyrus the Great? In 1879, archaeologists discovered a broken clay cylinder covered in Akkadian cuneiform in Babylon. It turned out to be a royal proclamation from Cyrus himself, written after he conquered the city in 539 BCE. The text describes how Cyrus entered Babylon without bloodshed, ordered local temples restored, and allowed displaced peoples, including the Jews exiled by earlier kings, to return to their homelands. Modern historians slapped it with the nickname the world's first Bill of Rights. But for Cyrus, it was more of a political statement to legitimize his rule. The cylinder is about 9 inches long, written in the Babylonian script of the time, and was presumably buried in the foundations of the city walls as an official record. Our knowledge of when the earliest dockyards were built is all out of whack. Some people will tell you that Henry VII was a key figure in docking ships back in 1496. However, there were ancient civilizations that were also using these types of structures. Specifically, the peoples of the Indus Valley, now Pakistan and northwest India, who in approximately 2400 BCE made a basin out of bricks where vessels could dock and get stuff on and off for trading and other purposes. The basin was located at Lothal, a city near the Gulf of Kambat, and while you couldn't describe it as a modern dock, it definitely fulfilled the criteria for a dock-like construction. They used hydraulic features that would impress modern-day engineers, so no wonder future builders followed this blueprint. Think Everest is the ultimate climbing challenge? Meet Mount Kailash, a 22,000-foot pyramid of ice that isn't just unclimbable, it's basically untouchable. For starters, 4 major religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Bon, believe this peak is the spiritual bullseye of the entire universe. For the Hindus, Shiva meditates there. For the Buddhists, it's a gateway to enlightenment, and pilgrims circle its base in a yearly ritual. For this reason, climbing it, forbidden. Full stop. Legend says the last brave soul to try, Yogi Milarepa, was assisted by the gods to achieve the climb. No other person has been able to make the climb. Then in 2001, a Spanish expedition tried, and promptly chickened out after locals warned of curses and divine smiting. Also, the mountain's extreme weather makes it dangerous, with sub-zero temperatures, high winds, and sudden snowstorms. But if that won't deter you, China enforced a strict taboo with icy resolve, preventing anyone from attempting to make the climb. So, with everything going on, bans, avalanches, storms, supernatural curses, Mount Kailash is practically a no-go area. Now let's look at one more underground cave you can't visit. Sticking with the subject of one-of-a-kind ancient clocks, I've also got to tell you about Al-Jazari's elephant clock from 1206 CE. It was part timekeeper, part mechanical theater, and stood on the back of a model elephant with a water tank hidden inside that ran the whole show. Every half hour, water would tip a float, triggering a ball to drop from a falcon's beak into a bowl, moving a little driver figure, and pushing a pointer forward to mark the time. It was basically a moving performance, just a lot more fun than ticking hands on a dial. Al-Jazari even blended symbols from around the world, an Indian elephant, a Chinese dragon, an Egyptian phoenix, and Arabian figures, to turn the clock into a multicultural masterpiece. Cloves don't grow in the Middle East. They don't grow in India either. The only place they come from is the Maluku Islands of Indonesia. So, how did a handful of them end up inside a ruined house in Turkey, Syria almost 3,700 years ago? Archaeologists found the charred buds during excavations in the late 70s, and dating put them at about 1720 BCE. That single discovery rewrote what we knew about ancient trade. Instead of Rome's spice routes being the starting point, merchants were clearly hauling goods thousands of miles much earlier. The journey would have carried them from Southeast Asia to India through Persia and into Mesopotamia before reaching Syria. So they were probably elite imports meant for ritual or luxury use. Check out this awesome ancient ventilation system. Made of towers that channeled airflow in an ingenious way, they provided much needed cool air for the Sogdian people who lived in Central Asia. This place was super hot, making the invention of such a system a major step forward. Plus, we're talking about the days before electricity. Well before, in fact, as they lived from the 6th to 11th century. So, how did the Sogdians get the air through the towers and into people's homes and general buildings? They apparently harnessed the difference between air temperature and air pressure, which gave the towers their own natural power source. In October 2019, crowds gathered at the base of Uluru, not for the usual tourist selfie, but to mark a final farewell. This wasn't just any visit. It was the last time climbers would be allowed to ascend the sacred rock. The Uluru Cave is a large sandstone monolith in Australia's Red Centre, and is deeply sacred to the Anangu, the Pitjantjatjara people. The caves carved into its surface aren't just natural formations. They hold ancient Aboriginal paintings, ancestral stories, and an unbroken cultural connection of over 60,000 years strong. Since the late 30s, Uluru had been a popular tourist destination, but in 2019 a ban was finally placed on civilians accessing it. It's not just about respect, it's about preserving a cultural heritage. Visitors are only allowed to look with reverence, but not dare trespass the sacred summit. Archimedes might have been busy creating the backbone of calculus, but the man also found the time to play war games. When the Romans attacked Syracuse in 212 BCE, they didn't just face catapults. Archimedes had taken that technology and supercharged it, making the machines stronger, more accurate, and way more sophisticated. His crews could launch heavier stones, hit targets farther away, and even switch between close range and long range modes. Plus, he added inventions no one had seen before, like the giant claw that could grab enemy ships and flip them over. Now, I know some of you will disagree with me in the comments saying this never happened, but archaeologists have found catapult parts and fittings in Syracuse that match these ancient stories, and modern engineers have proven the principles would absolutely work. It shows Archimedes wasn't just a brilliant mathematician, but also an applied engineer who pushed mechanical advantage to its absolute limit. By the 9th century, the Silk Road wasn't only running across deserts, it also stretched across the oceans. If you need proof, look no further than the Belitung shipwreck discovered in Indonesian waters in 1998. The vessel itself had been built in the Persian Gulf using stone plank construction, a technique unique to the region. Packed into its hold were between 60,000 to 70,000 Chinese ceramics from the Tang dynasty, along with ornate gold and silver pieces clearly tailored for West Asian buyers. The cargo was massive. In fact, it was the largest Tang cache ever recovered, and was, in all likelihood, headed back to the Abbasid Caliphate after a successful trading mission to China. Instead, the ship sank off Indonesia, where it lay untouched for over 1,100 years. You've heard of smelted iron, but what about meteoric iron? This was a form of iron and nickel, and as the name states, it comes from a meteorite. That isn't such a big deal, as a lot of metals come from space anyway. However, late Bronze Age people on the Iberian Peninsula took meteoric iron and used it for everything, from tools to sacred items. We don't know exactly how old the artifacts they made are, but they date to at least the period of 1200 to 900 BCE. Why did they use meteoric iron? It was strong, so perfect for something like a weapon, and it was also rare and prestigious. You could also work with it cold, avoiding the whole hot, sweaty business of smelting in the first place. Interestingly, while it was prized in the Bronze Age, meteoric iron wasn't appreciated too much in the Iron Age, which is pretty ironic given the era was named after that particular metal. In northern Spain's Cantabria region, the Altamira Cave holds its own ancient gallery of vivid prehistoric paintings. But visiting it, that's no longer an option. Back in 2002, scientists realized that human breath, specifically again carbon dioxide, was damaging ancient art. Green mold had already begun creeping over the cave walls, threatening to wipe away the legacy left behind thousands of years ago. Access was shut down immediately. A brief exception came in 2014 when the cave was reopened under strict conditions. Only 5 people were randomly selected and allowed just 37 minutes each inside. After that, locked again. Earlier in 2010, there were plans to reopen it, but by December of that year, Spain's Ministry of Culture scrapped the idea altogether, and it remained permanently closed. The verdict was clear. Modern humans and ancient masterpieces just aren't compatible. So this archaeological site is forbidden from anyone to enter. Now, here's a very interesting case. When British soldiers looted the Nigerian kingdom in 1897, they stumbled upon bronzes so perfect that experts back home were stunned. They had discovered the treasures of the kingdom of Benin in what is now southern Nigeria. There were thousands of them. Intricate plaques, statues, ivory masks, and even decorated tusks, all made using a sophisticated lost wax casting method that rivaled anything Europe had achieved. At the time, British officials could hardly believe African artists had created the beautifully finished metalwork on their own. Many pieces showed scenes of royal court life, warriors, and spiritual symbols, preserving a rich culture that had been thriving for centuries. After the invasion, these bronzes were scattered across the world, sent to museums, sold to collectors, or just kept as trophies by the soldiers who took them. Today, more than 5,000 of these priceless objects are tracked through an online project called Digital Benin, which maps their locations in 131 museums across 20 countries. Archaeologists digging in the Indus Valley have turned up thousands of small square seals, but none of them is more famous than the so-called unicorn seal. Now that image of a unicorn that just jumped into your head? Yeah, it doesn't look like that. It's more like a longhorn bull drawn in profile. Over half of the Indus seals discovered so far have that same horned animal, and yet the script carved above is still unreadable. Despite decades of attempts, no one has managed to crack the Indus writing system, which means we don't actually know if these seals recorded names, prayers, or inventory labels. What we do know is that the seals were carved from steatite and used like stamps. They've been found across Harappan cities and even at Mesopotamian sites, showing just how far Indus trade networks spread. Reservoirs transporting water were being built way back in the 8th century BCE. The kingdom of Urartu, an area now known as Armenia, Turkey, and Iran, created these structures from stone. Linked to canals, the reservoirs took supplies of spring water to military sites, cities, and farms around the territories. The Urartians went further too, with aqueducts and dams becoming part of their ambitious water management system. They were also able to store water in their various stone structures, which was essential under the circumstances. The kingdom was not in the most hospitable of places, so people needed fresh water. As it came from the mountains, the wet stuff didn't get much fresher. The Urartians may be an ancient people, but their legacy is remembered centuries later, with the UNESCO organization recognizing their achievements and heritage. Ever wondered what the Court of Kings in the Iron Age looked like? Dun Elene in Ireland might give you a solid idea, but it's too bad it's off limits to the public. So what's the deal with this place? Well, it was the Gaelic royal site, once the home of kings. Think of it as the VIP lounge for kings and chiefs. It was a major ceremonial and political hub in Gaelic Ireland. The site has been excavated since 1968, revealing structures and evidence of royal life. But it wasn't just for royalty. It seems to have been occupied during the spring and summer months with signs of cooking, including bones from cows, sheep, pigs, deer, and even horses. Today, the whole site sits on private farmland and is closed off to visitors. But there's a catch. If there are cattle roaming the hill, you'll have to wait it out because of difficulty accessing the site. But if they're not around, you can ask the landowners for permission to stroll around. Who knows? They might have called it Atlantis' treasure, but this golden red metal was actually the result of ancient brass mastery. In 2015, marine archaeologists exploring a Greek shipwreck near Gela, Sicily, pulled up dozens of shining copper-zinc alloy ingots. In ancient times, people called this material auriculum and believed it was the prized metal of Atlantis, second only to gold. But when scientists ran modern tests, they confirmed it was a type of high-quality early brass made by mixing copper with zinc ore and charcoal in a closed crucible. The process, known as cementation, takes serious talent because zinc vaporizes easily, and controlling it isn't simple, even today. The Gela shipwreck dates these ingots to around the 6th century BCE, and they were probably headed for luxury workshops to be turned into ornaments or weapon decorations. The ancient Vietnamese's bronze casting probably couldn't get any more ambitious than what they did with the dong song drums. The largest examples were almost a meter high, weighed over 200 pounds, and were poured in single casts. The oldest ones go back to 600 BCE, and what makes them pop isn't just their size. The drums were decorated with sunbursts, birds, warriors, rice farming, and even boats full of rowers. It's believed that the drums were used in rituals, harvest festivals, and leadership ceremonies. The sound carried far, so they might have also been used to gather people or to send signals. Nearly identical drums have been dug up across Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, southern China, and even as far as Indonesia. So, just like the Greeks and the Phoenicians, the Dong Song culture was plugged into a wide trade and influence network 2,500 years ago. Important hydraulic work was done between the years 100 and 800 by the Moche civilization. Their environment was a major challenge for farmers, being dry and in the heart of South America. They needed an extensive network of canals and reservoirs to transport and drain water, something they managed to do by diverting river water along great distances. In some cases, the water would travel tens of kilometers. This journey didn't happen in a straight line either, with a lot of terrain to cover at many altitudes and angles. Crops were nourished and people were hydrated, as the hydraulic systems coped with gallons of water against a backdrop of floods, droughts, and other obstacles. When you hear waterfall, your brain probably pictures water tumbling down, right? But horizontal falls in Western Australia decided to flip the script. Here, the water flows sideways, all thanks to the powerful tides getting squeezed through two narrow gorges. It's such a beautiful natural spectacle that some even call it one of the greatest wonders of the natural world. But even the most beautiful places can turn deadly. On May 27, 2022, just after 7 a.m., a tourist boat called the Falls Express slammed into a rock wall. It had 28 people on board. Chaos followed. 6 aircraft were dispatched and 18 people were flown out with injuries ranging from head trauma to broken bones. Now, authorities are planning to ban tourists from passing through the narrow gaps entirely. Just hearing about this place got me excited. An ocean actually rushing sideways? So sad I might not ever get to see it in person. Finally, the Dead Sea Scrolls are probably the most important find of the 20th century, rewriting what we know about ancient Judaism and the early roots of Christianity. When Bedouin shepherds stumbled across clay jars in caves near the Dead Sea back in the 40s, nobody could have guessed what was inside. More than 800 fragile manuscripts had been hidden away for almost 2,000 years, written on parchment, papyrus, and even hammered copper. The inks, the handwriting, and the sheer organization of these texts showed a level of literacy and record-keeping that people don't usually associate with the ancient world. They included the oldest known versions of Bible books, plus hymns, prayers, commentaries, and even a treasure map-like copper scroll. And it proves their religious and cultural traditions were far more complex and structured than most people imagine, focused on preserving important texts long before anyone dreamed up the idea of libraries. The Longmen Grottoes are one of China's greatest archaeological sites, cliffside packed with Buddhist art that was created over the course of 400 years. After the northern Wei dynasty moved its capital to Luoyang in the late 5th century, thousands of workers and artisans began carving the art straight into the cliffs. Emperors, monks, and wealthy families all funded new caves and statues, ending with more than 1,400 individual grottos filled with about 100,000 Buddhist figures, from thumb-sized icons to the 55-foot Vairocana Buddha commissioned by Empress Wu Zetian in the 7th century. There are also more than 3,600 inscriptions and steles, which documented some of the donations, teachings, and imperial decrees. By the time the Tang dynasty fell in the 10th century, new carvings had stopped, and the caves were left as they stand today. One surprising luxury that was enjoyed in ancient Rome was underfloor heating. If you were lucky enough to live in a prosperous household, you had money to pay for hypocaust heating, which took heat from a furnace and directed it through a series of passages beneath your feet. They installed the hypocaust system in public baths as well, so that maybe the little guy had a shot at warming his tootsies. Now, the Romans didn't invent underfloor heating. This was invented by the ancient Koreans in 5000 BCE. However, they definitely used technology to make their lives more comfortable.